Hi, for this particular objective, 4 and 5, what I'm going to do is do a little intro to it for your class specifically. And then I'm going to hand you over to what I do for my macro class to help you understand it at a little bit deeper level. So let's go ahead and jump into it. I think, here we go. There we go. Okay. All right. So we're looking at unemployment here. And so the main place where we get the unemployment rate is the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And what I did was did some screenshots and put them into um, this particular PowerPoint for you. So this is the Bureau of Labor Statistics. If you go to bls.gov, right, and you can, economists love data. I mean, we love it, and we torture data until it just can't tell us anything else. So we see here that there's been some releases. Okay, unemployment rate for persons with a disability increases in 2020. Again, that could be COVID related. And here's the producer price index. That has to do with the investment category of the real GDP. Some characteristics of the minimum wage. So if you're interested in all this discussion about the minimum wage, just do know that the minimum wage that they're talking about is the federal minimum wage. It is not the minimum wage for states, because that is decided by each state, not by the federal government. Here, I've pulled up the civilian unemployment rate, okay? And the reason I like this slide, and I show it to students all the time, is because if you're struggling with a report on how to get it to the maximum number of pages, this stuff is so easy to pull up at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. All you have to do is to show what you want to look at. And what's nice is when I rested my cursor here, it told me exactly how much it was. So this is the unemployment rate. The shaded portions are periods of recession. So that can help you kind of marry the business cycle with the unemployment rate. Also note seasonally adjusted. What does that mean? Seasonally adjusted means that there are certain workers, for example, construction workers here in Michigan, that don't work in the winter months. So we went ahead and stripped the data of that. So as you can see, the unemployment rate went way up here during COVID, and that was a problem. That was a problem. Okay, it was a symptom of this could be bad, right? This is bad, and it went almost to a high of 15%. Right now, the unemployment rate is 6.8% in our last reporting period of January of 2021. So the little nice part, when you click down here on this slide, says show table, this is what you would get. So you get the actual data points. The data points are broken out by gender, ethnicity, age, and so on. We do know that the unemployment rate tends to increase for teens during periods of problematic times. This one, I did not scroll all the way down. I just wanted to show you that we do break it out according to ethnicity, gender, and age. Okay, so your book talks firstly about the labor force, and the labor force is defined. Oh, golly, let's see. It's not working with me. So let me just get it here. And here, come on. The labor force is defined by the number of people employed. And I'm going to define that when I hand you over to my slides that I usually use with my macro class. And the number of people employed plus the number of people unemployed becomes the labor force. Now, a lot of people think that this encompasses everyone. It doesn't, because there's a third category, and that is not in the labor force. If you're a full-time student, you're not in the labor force. If you're active military, you're not in the labor force. If you're a retiree, you're not in the labor force. And I'm going to talk about in just a moment another section, which are discouraged workers. To be unemployed, you actually have to be looking for work. Discouraged workers have given up looking for work because they do not feel jobs are out there. Here's the Michigan labor force. And again, tried to pull this up so it was very relevant for you in 2021. And you can see that we have some peaks, we have some troughs, we have periods of downturn and periods of upturn. So pretty erratic, okay, if you look at it. Now, again, the reason it's erratic is because of COVID. And COVID particularly hit restaurants and tourists. And Michigan's economy has a lot to do with those two industries. So just something to show you here. Again, you can boil this down. You can go all the way down to your local city. You could go down to your county. And again, look at those unemployment statistics. There are different types of unemployment rates. The most common one, and the one I'm going to show you in the upcoming lecture, is U3. Okay. And U3 basically says we're going to use the typical ideology and we're going to take the number of people unemployed divided by the number of people employed times 100 and express that as a percent. We're not including a lot of the individuals not in the labor force. There are other ways to calculate the unemployment rate. For example, U6 will calculate individuals which are marginally attached, those kind of things. So who's included? In U3, we're not going to include all the individuals which are not in the labor force. And that can be a pretty large percentage. Okay. And again, as I said just a moment ago, full-time students. Okay. So one's full-time students, retirees, disabled, the independently wealthy. I hope we all get there. Oh, let's see who else is in there. The incarcerated. Okay, and also the active military. Okay, so when we talk about excluding all of those factions, I also want to put discouraged workers here because that's an important one to look at. When we exclude a lot of these categories, the unemployment rate tends to be understated if we're looking at U3. If we look at some of these others like U6, there's various ones out there that will tend to include some of those populations. Okay, if everyone, here's your criticisms of the unemployment rate. If everyone is not included, does the unemployment rate even matter? And the answer to that is actually yes. It does matter. We just want to make sure that we're comparing the same types of rates. So if you're using U3, you want to continue to use U3. Moreover, the unemployment rate could be U3U or U3W. Now, what's the difference between the U and the W? U are for urban workers, which tend to be salaried. And W means wage earners, which tend to be hourly. And we know that economic downturns affect these two groups differently. So what do I want to say about the unemployment rate is it could be very misleading. For example, if the unemployment rate decreases, is that necessarily a good thing? And it's not necessarily a good thing. We have to look at who is decreasing. So when we look at the unemployment rate, if we have a lot of people that were looking for jobs and they were in the employed category and have subsequently given up looking for jobs, then they move to not in the labor force. they are no longer included in the unemployment rate. So the unemployment rate goes down, when in fact, that's not the case. It looks like unemployment is going down, but what essentially has happened is people have given up looking for work. So that can be problematic. So I want to say it's a little misleading. Because it's a little misleading, we use another rate to look at alongside the unemployment rate, and this is the labor force participation rate. The labor force participation rate takes a look at the number of people unemployed plus employed and divides that by the adult population. And we multiply that by 100 and we get a certain percentage rate. If we see a very low labor force participation rate, that could tell us that the unemployment rate is misleading. So for example, if the labor participation rate is only 30%, that basically means that 70% of that area of those individuals that could and are able to work are not working. So that's problematic for us. Here's an example. And again, this is a little dated, but I think it gives you a good example. Here's 2009, and we have the number of people unemployed in the white area. Those marginally attached, including discouraged workers here in this black slice, and then others not in the labor force. And those would be, again, disabled, retirees, and so on. Notice a pretty large percentage. And then in the light gray, we have those that are employed. So you can kind of get a perspective of how large are these percentages and how much of a problem it is. But again, what we would look at is the labor force participation rate. And if 100% is the entire pie, you can kind of see that roughly, I would say about 45% are not in the labor force. And so that's interesting for us to kind of look at when we look at the particular unemployment rate. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to calculate the unemployment rate, and I'm going to turn you over to my macroeconomic slides at this point. Thanks for your time and attention. Have a great day. Welcome to Chapter 28, Learning Objective 2. And here we're actually going to do a mathematical problem calculating unemployment. So let's go ahead and jump into it. And let me share my screen with you. All right, here we are. So that's what we're going to do in this objective, is calculate the unemployment rate for an economy. And remember, just a couple of terms to remember, that the labor force is made up of the number of people employed plus the number of people unemployed. How we calculate the unemployment rate, I talked about in the last objective, but we're just going to take the number of people unemployed divided by the labor force times 100, and we express that answer as a percentage. So it's the unemployment rate, or U rate, which I've referred to in the intro to these little videos. This graph gives you a historical perspective on the unemployment rate since 1960 along the red. The blue is a new term, and the blue is what we call the natural rate of unemployment. This natural rate is that there's always going to be people changing jobs, and changing jobs is not necessarily a bad thing, particularly if you're changing to a better position with better pay, better opportunities, and so on. So we're always going to have a certain amount of unemployment. This natural rate is set based upon trends and where we see things. And here we did have a natural rate of 6%. The natural rate now is 4%. That might get adjusted, that 4%, from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And the reason is because of Corona. It may go up a point for the foreseeable future, but I'm not so sure. I haven't kept up on the natural rate and changes and such. Okay, so here's a problem that we're going to work out. The adult population of the US by group and the number of people employed, the number of people unemployed and not in the labor force. So we want to compute the labor force because that's what we're going to need to know to compute the unemployment rate. So remember, the labor force is equal to the number of people employed. I'll call that A, plus the number of people unemployed. And I'll call that B. We do not look at not in the labor force in this particular scenario. So 145.9 plus 8.5, how about 154.4? Okay, so now we know our labor force, but we want to compute our unemployment rate. And I'm going to do that on the next slide just so I have a little bit more room. So we said that the labor force, when we added the employed and unemployed together, we said that the labor force was 154.4 million. To compute the unemployment rate, what we're going to do is use that formula on the preceding slides, and we're going to say the number of people unemployed divided by the labor force. And remember, we just calculated the labor force right here. So let's take a look. The number of people unemployed is 8.5. So we're going to take 8.5, divide it by the 154.4, multiply that by 100, and express it as a percentage. So let me go ahead and do that. I have 5.51. So that's what the unemployment rate would be in this scenario. And let's check our answers just to be sure. 5.5. I might have keyed in something a little bit incorrectly here, but 154.4 is the labor force, the unemployment rate of 5.5. So I usually ask students at this point, is 5.5 bad? And it's not necessarily bad if the natural rate is 6. The natural rate kind of gives us a barometer. If the natural rate is 6 and we're at 5.5, that's not a problem. If the natural rate is 4 and we're at 5.5, then that might be more of a significant indicator that things are not, economically speaking, going according to plan. Okay, that's the end of this objective, and I'll see you back in the third objective where we talk about the corresponding feature to help us understand the unemployment rate, and that's the labor force participation rate. You want to look at both. If you just rely on the unemployment rate, as we saw in previous objectives, when the unemployment rate goes down, that could be a bad thing, right? So we're also going to look at what are the percentage of people in that adult population that are working. So I'll see you back in objective 3. Thanks.